Of this week's choral course. The choir stood behind me are completely unauditioned, and they met together for the first time just under a week ago on Friday night. As well as singing in full choir, they've been dividing up into smaller consort groups and have also received individual singing lessons. For our next piece, we move from the early 17th century world of Orlando Gibbons to the late 17th century, and we move to Portugal. Melgas was the last of the great Portuguese polyphonic masters of the late Renaissance. His Salve Regina, I suppose you could describe it really as a sacred madrigal, if such a genre exists. Don't be fooled by the very conventional opening of this piece. It gets pretty mad quite quickly. Firstly, you'll notice a lot of very funky syncopation, I hope, and that's deliberate. And secondly, it becomes very slushy. On the last page could almost be Bruckner in places. It's a pretty extraordinary writing for the late Renaissance. We then move forward 100 years to the 18th century and the Magnificat from Purcell's Evening Service in G minor. You may well know this. This is a stalwart of the cathedral tradition, and it's done in virtually every cathedral now around the country. This setting has long been a real favourite. Its texture is really, it juxtaposes four-part full choir sections with verse sections, solo sections. There are two groupings, one with two sopranos and alto, and one with an alto, tenor and bass. But first, that Melgas. As well as this afternoon's recital, the choir have been working towards 2 choral evensongs. One took place on Wednesday evening in St George's Chapel, Windsor, up the hill, and the other last night in Oxford at Magdalen College, where Mark Williams conducted. We also enjoyed a workshop given by John Rutter, and the next 2 pieces were 2 pieces that John worked on with the choir, both from the Austro-German Romantic tradition this time. Geistliches Lied, or Sacred Song, is Brahms's first accompanied choral work. He wrote it in 1856 when he was just 23 years old. As you'll see from your programmes, the text is all about acceptance of fate and trust in God. Remarkably, it's a double canon. Let me explain to you why this is so clever. The tenor part imitates the soprano part 4 beats after the sopranos have started. That's quite clever. That's like London's Burning or Frere Jacques, I suppose. But the clever thing is it is 1 note higher. It's a canon at the 9th, which is extraordinarily difficult to do. Try it when you get home. Now that would be pretty amazing. But he goes 1 stage further. The alto part, which comes in with a different tune just after the sopranos have started, is heard again in the bass part, 4 beats after the altos have started, and again 1 note higher than the alto part. It's completely mind-blowing. Now, that this amazing compositional exercise, I suppose, it must have started off, turned into this thing of beauty, you would never know if you just heard this piece. But listen very carefully, listen to the pairing of the soprano and the tenor and the alto and bass, and you'll understand why this is truly one of the greatest pieces of choral music in my view. Then we have Bruckner's Ave Maria. This was written just 5 years after Geistliches Lied in 1861. The piece starts with the upper voices, and then you hear the lower voices, and then for the second half of the text, he unites the choir in praise of the Virgin Mary, and do follow the text for that. So we have the Brahms and then the Bruckner. So in a moment we're going to perform one of House's most famous settings of the Magnificat. This one composed following a commission by the Dean in Chapter of Gloucester Cathedral. But first, a highly unusual piece, I suppose, which you may not have heard before, Judith Bingham's Corpus Christi Carol. This was written for the choir book for the Queen. This was a collection of contemporary compositions put together in 2012 to mark the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. The late medieval text, and I do urge you to look at this in your programmes, it's pretty extraordinary stuff. It's been interpreted in a number of different ways. Some people believe that it refers to the Arthurian legend of the Holy Grail and the knight who was protecting the Holy Grail, who was wounded constantly on his legs. And so some people think it's about that. However, Judith Bingham, the composer, really interpreted the carol as a late 15th century lament for those people who died in the War of the Roses. And this, I suppose, provides a really interesting link with this building. You may well know that this chapel was built by Henry VI just after King's College, Cambridge. And he built it started in 1441. But then we had the Wars of the Roses, and he was deposed, and work stopped in this chapel in 1461. Originally, the chapel was supposed to be almost double the size it is at the moment. And if you walk down Keats Lane, keep on going that way, you'll see a cross up on the boarding house where it was supposed to end. But because of the War of the Roses, Henry VI was deposed, and the chapel was truncated just there and being finished off in 1469. So there's a real link, I think, with this period of the text. It's perhaps worth reading out what Judith Bingham herself said about this piece. So I'm just going to quote it now. I'd always wanted to set this text. A knight, always bleeding, lies in a chapel, a young woman weeping at his side. The chapel is decked out in funereal colours, and at the side of the knight are written the words Corpus Christi, the body of Christ, as if the crucifixion is being played out over and over again. The music is a series of canons, so similar to the Brahms in that way. The music is a series of canons which overlap, and the atmosphere of the music is like a sunny and fresh English landscape that gradually clouds over. More than anything, I wanted to create an intensely atmospheric sound.
Thank you.
for our final two pieces, I just wanted to thank you for coming to support this concert. Please do spread the word about the choral courses. Around 400 young people take part in these courses each summer. And it's our aim that nobody is unable to do it for financial reasons. We have a generous bursary fund. So please do spread the word. And it would be wonderful to see even more students taking advantage of these opportunities next year. And so to our final pieces. We'll end the concert with Britain's Festival Te Deum. This was written for the choir of St Mark's, Swindon, and it was first performed there in 1945 by their parish choir. But first, a remarkable piece by Jonathan Dove, Seek Him That Maketh the Seven Stars. The theme of light and starlight in particular has been an endless source of inspiration to composers over the years. Here, the organ part you'll hear creates the sort of twinkly star effect at the opening. And the piece moves from an atmosphere of devotional longing, eventually into a full-on dance, before we end in eternal serenity. Thank you very much once again for coming to the concert.